Right now, your body is doing something that shouldn't be possible. Trillions of cells are dividing, repairing, communicating, keeping you alive without you thinking about it once. You take this for granted, everyone does. But for the first 9 billion years of the universe's existence, not one single thing was alive anywhere. Not a bacterium, not a molecule that could copy itself, nothing. And then on a rock orbiting an unremarkable star, something changed. This is the story of what had to happen before anything could live at all. Not evolution, not dinosaurs, not humans, before any of that. The setup, the impossible chain of accidents that had to occur in exactly the right order on exactly the right planet for life to become possible in the first place. Because here's the thing most people never stop to consider. The universe is not friendly to life. It is mostly empty space, radiation, and rock. Life is not the default outcome of a universe existing. Life is the exception. And the fact that you exist to hear this sentence means an almost absurd number of things had to go right first. Let's start at the beginning, not human beginning, the actual beginning. About 4.6 billion years ago, our solar system was not a solar system at all. It was a slowly rotating cloud of gas and dust left over from an earlier generation of stars that had already lived and died. Gravity pulled that cloud inward. The center got hotter and denser until nuclear fusion ignited and the sun turned on. Everything left over after that, the scraps of gas, dust, and rock that didn't fall into the sun, began clumping together. Small particles stuck to slightly bigger particles. Bigger particles collided and merged into rocks. Rocks smashed into other rocks and became planetesimals. Planetesimals collided violently again and again for tens of millions of years until one of those collisions produced something roughly the size of Earth. This early Earth was nothing like the planet you know. There was no blue ocean, no green land. It was a molten ball of rock, glowing red and orange, bombarded constantly by asteroids and debris still falling out of the young solar system. Temperatures on the surface were hot enough to melt stone. If you had stood on Earth at this point, you would have died in less than a second, and there would have been nowhere on the entire planet where that wouldn't be true. Then, roughly 4.5 billion years ago, something happened that geologists still argue about in detail but broadly agree changed everything. A planet roughly the size of Mars, sometimes called Theia, slammed into the young Earth. The collision was so violent it partially melted both bodies and blasted an enormous amount of debris into orbit. That debris eventually clumped together and became the Moon. Researchers studying lunar rock samples brought back by the Apollo missions found that the Moon's composition closely matches Earth's outer layers, strong evidence for this giant impact hypothesis. Without that collision, you likely wouldn't have a moon large enough to stabilize Earth's tilt, which means you likely wouldn't have stable seasons, which means the climate systems that allowed complex life to eventually develop might never have existed at all. Your planet's ability to support you may trace back to a single catastrophic crash 4.5 billion years ago. Does that feel like luck to you, or does it feel like something else? For hundreds of millions of years after that, Earth kept cooling. The molten surface slowly solidified into rock. Gases trapped inside the planet, water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrogen, escaped through volcanic activity and began forming an atmosphere. As the planet cooled further, water vapor in that atmosphere condensed and fell as rain, an almost unimaginable amount of rain, falling for possibly thousands of years without stopping, filling the low points of the crust and forming the first oceans. This period is sometimes called the Hadean Eon, named after Hades, the underworld, because the conditions were closer to hell than to anything you'd recognize as habitable. And yet somewhere inside those violent, boiling, chemically chaotic oceans, the ingredients for life were already gathering. Here's where the story gets genuinely strange, because life didn't appear from nothing. It emerged from chemistry. Ordinary, physical, explainable chemistry given enough time and the right conditions. In 1952, a chemist named Stanley Miller, working under Nobel laureate Miller-Urey at the University of Chicago, ran an experiment that changed how scientists thought about the origin of life. He filled a sealed blast apparatus with water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen, gases believed to resemble early Earth's atmosphere, and ran an electrical current through the mixture to simulate lightning. Within a week, the water inside had turned pink, then a deep, murky red. When Miller analyzed the liquid, he found amino acids, the basic building blocks of proteins, the same molecules that make up every single living cell on the planet, including yours. Nobody put life into that jar. Chemistry did it on its own. The Miller-Urey experiment didn't prove exactly how life began, but it proves something enormous. The raw ingredients for life are not rare or mystical. They can form spontaneously, given energy and the right starting chemicals. The universe, it turns out, is silently building the components of life almost everywhere the conditions allow it. But amino acids alone are not life. A pile of bricks is not a house. Something had to organize these molecules into something that could hold information, replicate, and maintain itself against the chaos constantly trying to tear it apart. This is where scientists still disagree, sometimes fiercely, about exactly what happened next. One leading idea centers around the deep ocean floor, specifically around structures called hydrothermal vents, cracks in the seafloor where mineral-rich, superheated water pours out from beneath the crust. Researcher Michael Russell and biochemist Nick Lane have argued for decades that these vents, particularly a type called alkaline hydrothermal vents, created exactly the kind of chemical gradient early life would have needed. Tiny mineral chambers within these vents could have trapped organic molecules, concentrated them, and provided a steady flow of chemical energy, essentially acting like a natural, geological incubator for the first stirrings of biology. No lightning required, no surface required, just rock, water, and billions of years of patient chemistry happening in total darkness at the bottom of an ocean that had barely finished forming. For some reason, during that process, one of the most important steps in the entire history of the universe took place. A molecule learned to copy itself. This sounds simple. It is not. For something to be considered even remotely alive, it needs some kind of membrane or boundary that separates itself from its environment, and it needs some way to store information and pass that information on. Researchers like Jack Szostak, a molecular biologist at Harvard, who later won a Nobel Prize, have spent years in the lab attempting to recreate this exact transition, building simple fatty membranes called protocells, and testing whether RNA, a molecule similar to DNA, could replicate inside them under early Earth conditions. What his research and others in the field have shown is that RNA can act as both the storage material for genetic information and the tool that helps copy that information without needing the more complex separate systems that modern cells use. This idea that RNA came before DNA and before proteins as we know them is called the RNA world hypothesis, and it remains one of the most compelling explanations for how the very first steps of self-replication could have occurred using nothing but molecules interacting with each other in the right environment. Once a molecule could copy itself, even imperfectly, everything changed, because imperfect copying means mutation, and mutation combined with a competitive environment means something extraordinary becomes possible: selection. The molecules that copied themselves more efficiently outcompeted the molecules that didn't. This isn't intention. There is no goal here, no plan, no direction being aimed at humans or intelligence or you. It's simply math playing out over an almost incomprehensible span of time. Better replicators persisted, worse replicators didn't. Repeat that process for hundreds of millions of years, and you get increasingly complex, increasingly stable, increasingly capable chemical systems. Eventually, likely somewhere between 3.7 and 4.2 billion years ago, one of those systems crossed a threshold that scientists retroactively call life. The earliest fossil evidence, layered rock structures called stromatolites built by ancient microbial communities, suggests that by roughly 3.5 billion years ago, life wasn't just present on Earth, it was already organized enough to leave physical structures behind that we can still find today. Think about the timeline here, because it matters. Earth formed about 4.6 billion years ago. Life appeared in some form within the first billion years after that, on a planet that was still being pummeled by asteroids, still cooling from a molten state, still had almost no oxygen in its atmosphere. Life did not wait for ideal conditions. It emerged in the middle of chaos, in an environment that would kill you in seconds, using nothing but chemistry, time, and the raw materials any rocky planet in a habitable zone might reasonably have. That's not a comforting thought if you're hoping life is rare in the universe. It's the opposite. It suggests something more unsettling and more thrilling at the same time. It suggests that given water, the right chemical building blocks, and enough time, life might not be a miracle at all. It might simply be what chemistry does, eventually, when nobody stops it. Every single living thing that has ever existed on this planet, every bacterium, every tree, every dinosaur, every whale, and every human being who has ever lived, traces back to that first successful replicator in that ancient dark ocean. Not a spark of magic, a molecule that learned to make a copy of itself before anything else in the universe, as far as we know, ever had. You are not separate from that moment. You are the current expression of an unbroken chemical process that has been running for roughly 3.7 billion years. Every single ancestor in that chain survived long enough to reproduce.
every single one, going back to a molecule in a hydrothermal vent that had no brain, no intention, and no idea what it was starting. So the next time you feel small, remember what actually happened before you could exist. A planet had to form out of colliding rubble. A collision the size of a small planet had to carve out a moon to stabilize the seasons. An ocean had to fall from the sky for centuries. And somewhere in the dark, at the bottom of a boiling young ocean, a molecule had to learn to make one imperfect copy of itself, starting a chain that never once broke, all the way down to you, reading this sentence right now, alive, against odds so enormous they're almost impossible to calculate. You didn't just happen to be born. You are the result of everything that had to happen first.